हर स्क्रिप्ट का अपना एक सफ़र होता है। तो चलिए ऐसे ही एक सफ़र पे जिसका नाम है स्क्रिप्टनामा। हेलो एंड वेलकम टू स्क्रिप्टनामा सीजन 2, एक ऐसा पॉडकास्ट जो कहानी के पीछे की कहानी सुनाता है। Before we start our conversation with our today's guest, we want to thank all our listeners for their love and support. We are overwhelmed by the love we are getting for our show. Please continue to listen to our podcast and share it with your family, friends, colleagues, and even neighbors who aspire to become screenwriters and dream of writing India's next blockbuster or a binge-worthy show. At Scriptnama, we believe the next big shot screenwriter is among us. We would love to see your stories on big screen. Now, let me come to today's episode. Today's episode is very special for me, and it's special for two reasons. One is because we have with us an aspiring screenwriter and a stand-up comedian to co-host the episode with me. And second reason will be the guest that I will reveal to you in the second part. So first, let me please welcome Kenneth to our show. Hey Kenneth, hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here. I've heard this podcast, a lot of the episodes. So I'm very excited to be here.
And we are equally excited to have you. And thank you for joining us. It always feels better to have somebody to share the mic with. और आज के गेस्ट के बारे में मैं क्या ही बोलूँ, मतलब उनके बारे में लिटरली मैं जितना बोलूँ, एंड अंडरलाइन द वर्ड लिटरली, जितना मैं बोलूँ उतना कम है, क्योंकि उन्होंने सब कुछ किया है। उन्होंने बुक्स लिखी है, उन्होंने स्क्रीन प्लेज लिखे हैं, उन्होंने शोज लिखे हैं, उन्होंने डॉक्यू सीरीज बनाई है, उन्होंने नेटफ्लिक्स पे शो प्रोड्यूस किए हैं। She runs a media house and she has a very beautiful family that she takes care of. So please, all of you, welcome Anu Singh Chaudhary ma'am on our show. And she has asked me to drop ma'am, and I will try to do that. So please welcome Anu on our show.
Thank you. That is really special, Adesh. Thank you. Thank you, kids. So excited to be here.
Yeah, I was reading about all the things you've done, and it's like they couldn't even complete the list.
So today we are going to have a conversation with Anu ma'am. Let's start with the basics. What is the difference between a story and a screenplay, and what differentiates one from the other?
As the name suggests, screenplay is something that plays on screen. So whatever you will see on screen, when it is put in a form, which is quite technical in its grammar, and it has its own syntax, it has its own format, that is called screenplay. Now, screenplay consists of what is called story. Story is, in classical way of definition, it's something which has 5 key elements, which is, plot, which has characters, which probably will also have dialogues, which will also have some sort of structure to it, which makes a story. And the fifth part is that it will be cohesive. It will have a start, middle, and end. So that makes for a story. Screenplay is a screen version of that, which will have not just the story, but the dialogues that will be spoken, which will also have screenplay to be the technical document that will not only go to the actors who will be playing it. It's not just for the writer or the director. It's for the entire cast and crew who will go back to that roadmap again and again. So it's a technical document, I would say.
And then what are the skill sets one needs to be a very good screenwriter?
It's a very simple one. You have to be a very good rewriter to be a good screenwriter.
Truth has been spoken here.
So I had one follow-up question to that. So you write stories, like when you're a journalist, you also write stories.
Correct.
And you write stories also when you're like creating a screenplay.
Yes. And you're also telling a story through your Insta post. You're also telling a story when you're having. So story is, in that sense, a very intangible thing, and it can have several forms and shapes and, size and all of that.
No, so I was asking more on when you were a journalist, when you made that change to being a screenwriter, scriptwriter. So how did your version of looking at a story, how did your view of looking at a story change?
That's a great question, actually. What journalism teaches you is the most important thing, and it's a basic that of news writing, is that your first paragraph has to have the crux of whatever you want to say. whatever news, because news is the most important thing, peg of the story. What is the story about? That's the most important thing, which has to come in the first paragraph of the story. Or if it was to be like an AV, audio-visual news story, then the anchor link has to sum it up. And when you're entering, and it's just one, when we were doing journalism, we would not do more than 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes at max. That was the standard size of the stories that we would produce for news bulletins. So you had to be succinct. You had to be very, very precise. So that's rule number one. And I'll tell you how that becomes very, very handy when you're doing screenwriting. The second critical thing that I learned during the journalism is the very basic of, again, news gathering and news writing, which is very famously known as 5 W's and 1 H. So 5 W's consist of who, what, where, when, why, and H is how. This is how you put together the story. So you will realize that it's the basic. If you put that into if you take that as a parameter of any form of storytelling, including screenplay writing, you will see that there is an inherent structure to the screenplay. So these were the two important things that I learned from journalism, that whatever you have to say in the long format also, when I'm writing a series, you're writing for over 300, 400 minutes of content, which means almost in page length, I would say about 400 pages. 400 pages is a lot. Edited version of, like, multiple drafts, the final version that will go on shoot. So, which means your first act of the first episode will have to have the peg, the hook enough for the audience to suck in, to come back. That comes from a little bit of journalism training, and there's a fundamental that any storyteller will use, but it's used a lot in journalism. So that's what I learned, and I only honed it with so many master storytellers around me. And it was a basic thing that I would go back to, just for me to understand the thing that I was working on when I was working on a story, that was it fulfilling these key questions, the 6 key questions, the 5 W's and 1 H. And that would give a lot of answers. When you are discovering the story, it's a process. So you're continuously asking, why is this happening? What will happen next? When is this happening? What is the kind of impact that, when you're constantly asking these questions, which is what journalism teaches you, then it puts you on a quest, and it makes your work better.
Right. So, like in journalism, the role of journalist starts at one point and ends at a certain point. In filmmaking, what role does screenwriter plays, and where it starts and where it ends in the process of filmmaking?
That's also a very good question, but also there's a minute difference here. I would disagree that journalists or writers or filmmakers' job starts and gets over at any point. It really is dependent of the kind of person that you are. If you're a highly empathetic, for example, or you're very sensitive, then it stays with you. So there is no start or end to the job that you do. One part of you give yourself to that story, and that story also gives a lot. It's a constant give and take. Therefore, for the story to be authentic, it's important that you don't take it only just as a project, only just as a job. What is the impact that it is having on you? If you know that, then you will be able to identify the impact that you eventually want the story to have on the audience.
Yeah.
If you don't feel related to the story, if you don't feel invested, you cannot expect your audience to be invested while watching it. So it's a fundamental thing.
Right.
As simple as that.
You have told the role of a screenwriter that it never ends. But he has to provide a technical document, right?
Right.
And you have also told that a screenwriter is a rewriter.
Yes.
Now the question is, for a screenplay, what makes for an excellent screenplay that it would be picked by a producer or a director to be made into, or like to be adapted into screen?
Again, it's a very difficult question. Good question, but very, very difficult to answer, because excellence is subjective, I feel. I mean, how do you like really define? But there are certain parameters. You're right. And let's discuss some of those parameters. The first thing is that the core idea. What is the core idea that you're trying to tell through the screenplay? That has to have some sort of a uniqueness to it. Otherwise, we often joke about it that the person who's probably Serving coffee at a barista in Andheri also is aspiring to be either a screenwriter or a director or an actor.
दुखती रथ पे हाथ रख दिया
I
बस
am
आपने।
अभी
from
क्या ही,
Andheri.
अभी हम सब उस दुख से गुजरे हैं, इसलिए उस दुख को याद करते रहना जरूरी है. So when there are so many stories floating around, it will have to be unique to you. And how does it become unique to you? At least for the first spec script, let's talk about the first one that you're writing or you're trying to sell. It has to be personal to you. It has to be something that only you could have told. Which is that story? You have to first arrive at that story. Here's a basic difference. I'm not talking about work for hire assignments. And we'll talk about that too. I'm talking about what you want to write as a screenwriter. I mean, if you're writing your spec script, we're talking about that.
Yeah.
So if your personal story and therefore your personality becomes integral to that story that you're telling, you're writing that screenplay, it becomes unique automatically.
Right.
So which means that there is no shortcut, unfortunately.
Yes.
Which means that you really need to know, you really need to dig deep, you really need to ask uncomfortable questions from yourself. And when you're saying no, Adesh, when you were introducing the show about this show being critical to screenwriters and people who want a career in screenwriters, I was actually thinking that no, this kind of a show is important for anybody and everybody who wants to be a better human being. Because what screenwriting does is, or any form of writing does is, it pushes you to be a better human being. Because it teaches you to look at your life and the life around you with a different lens. It gives you empathy, it gives you sensitivity, it makes you, I would not say better, but a more hungry human being. You become more curious.
Yes.
And that is a curiosity when it begins to come in the screenplay.
Or in any form of work.
Any form of work. So these are intangible things, these are
Right.
emotional things that will heighten the emotional quotient of your, what I call technical document, which is a script, screenplay. Now, let's come to the technical aspect of it, which means that there are certain, so the screenplay has to be visual.
Yeah.
It has to be, when you're writing, you have to be a good editor. You cannot continue to wax eloquent. It has nothing to do with the language.
Right.
It's more about how you can say something in a very precise manner.
Yes.
That becomes important. How you're writing, how you're expressing becomes important. So you can't have long paragraphs describing the scenes. That's about the screenplay writing. When you're doing the dialogues have to sound unique to each character. Each character cannot sound the same. And then the third thing and the most important thing about that is the structure part of it.
Yes.
Like how you're structuring. Where is your first act ending? What's happening in the first act? Where is your intermission coming? Is there enough drama coming? And the critical part also, that each scene has to have some sort of a conflict. There's this famous thing that we keep using. Does your scene have ACR? Now, what is ACR? ACR is action, conflict, and reversal. How do you flip the scene in a way which makes it feel completely unexpected? I'll give you an example, very basic example. First example that is coming to my mind is that of the opening scene of a Korean-American film called Past Lives. I don't know if you've seen that film.
I have
It's
seen
a
the trailer. It's beautiful.
It's a beautiful film, and it opens on basically voiceover of two people, basically, looking at two people, and there three people sitting, and the voiceovers are basically making a comment on who these three could be and what their relationship could be.
Yeah.
Are they colleagues?
Yeah.
Are they boyfriend, girlfriend? Are they spouses? Who are these people?
Yeah.
And then towards the end, the girl looks into the camera. So then action is basically what's happening in that scene. Conflict is coming through the conflicting things that are being said in the voiceover. And the reversal is about this one little act or one little dialogue that breaks the monotony of the scene.
The moment. One moment.
The one moment. That could be a moment. That could be something that is being said. It can be anything. So that level of perfection only comes with practice. So that is what is required in the scene construction. So therefore, the screenplay, because screenplay is a technical document, your scenes have to be very interesting.
Right.
It's not just the larger story that you're saying, which is why I feel screenplay is difficult, far more difficult than novel writing. And we'll come to that when we discuss, different forms of writing.
Yes.
But these are the key things that you have to have about the technical document that will make your technical document or your script authentic, emotional, and sort of exciting and riveting enough for somebody to read.
Right.
And that requires, like I said, practice, which means that there's certain things that you must do, which
Mhm.
any screenwriter would have told you.
Mm-hmm.
That of reading scripts.
Yes.
The one thing, it's like everybody, we all know because we've all done this and that's how we've all learned.
Right.
Of course, there's one way of doing screenwriting masterclasses and taking a lot of those, which are also important. I'm not dismissing any of that, and I've done myself. So it is immensely helpful. But on an everyday basis, unless you're a discerning audience and reader,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot be a discerning writer. So, which means very simple exercise of picking up a film that you truly love. You know, we all have this one. We've looked at one film and we've been like, oh my God, I wish I had written this. Which is that one film? Uska script dhoond ke nikalo.
Sure.
Sit with that script and sit with that film and watch it at least 10 times and read the script. And then that will also make you realize why the scene is making you feel the way it is making you feel. You will know how a screenplay is written, which is making it easy for you to be able to see. So you can actually collate that, okay, how are these two things going hand in hand, which is the word
Mm-hmm.
and the visual transformation of it. So that is something that becomes very helpful. Also, very humble urge, this is also note to self, is that once your first draft is ready, pat yourself on your back, take a break,
Yes.
go out for a drink,
Yeah.
go with your friends, party as much as you want, go on a break, but come back 2 days later, 3 days later to do your another draft. And now read like this is not written by you,
Oh,
Mm.
as a third person.
as a third
Yeah.
person. And then begin to build on it. The first draft is always an emotional draft. It's an outburst.
Yes.
And we are always trying to sort of, prove something to ourselves first and
Yeah,
then to
yeah.
the world. That doesn't help because then you're emotionally attached to it.
Yeah.
So here you see the point that I'm trying to make is it never ends. And
Yeah.
it's not like you should write one, and it's very difficult. I really know because there's so many things that we are juggling. We have a day job. A lot of us are trying to break into the industry. We're trying to get a paid gig. We're trying to
Yes.
sell our
Mm.
screenplay. Survival is difficult. So how do you move on from one to the other? It took me many, many years to actually finally get a paid gig and multiple things that I did, but that we'll come to that later. But how do you keep that balance? The balance is that you will have to, in some way, when you have written one script which you're convinced about, don't stop there. Go on, find the next project.
Right.
Otherwise, it'll kill you.
Yes.
Otherwise, it'll really break your heart. And trust that if your spec script is good, maybe that won't get made, but it will fetch you some other work.
That has been like a lot of writers have told us that don't even expect your first film to be made on the basis of your first screenplay, but get it as a portfolio, get it as a CV,
Yeah.
get a foot in the door with your first script.
Yeah.
For that, at least for that, write your first script, finish it, and keep on working and rewriting it as many times as possible. Anu ma'am, you have just spoken about spec work. And two of your shows, Aarya and Grahan, are an adaptations. One is an adaptation of a foreign show. Another, Grahan, is an adaptation of a Hindi book, Chaurasi, written by Satya Vyasji. Now, my first question in context of this adaptation work is, what are the challenges of adapting a book or a film or series in foreign language? What are the main challenges?
The first challenge that comes to you is how do you become original? That's
Wow.
the first.
In the work of adaptation,
In the work of
first
adaptation.
challenge, yes.
Like, how do you keep your work original? And that is the biggest quest that any creator should have while having while associating with an adaptation. The second thing is the context. The
Right.
context, I'll speak in specifically in terms of Penosa, which is the Dutch series, which was adapted as Aarya. The context of Penosa is very different from the context of Aarya. We are two different cultures, we're two different countries. And yet there are certain things which are universal. So how do you while retaining the universal emotion, while retaining the universality of relationships and its ups and downs and the challenges that it throws, how do you make it contextual to an Indian audience? And honestly, in Aarya's case, I didn't have to do anything, because in that sense, the context had already been very, very well defined in Ram Madhwani's head, who was the creator of the show. And my responsibility with my co-writer in all seasons would be to just keep it close to that vision. So bringing back your material to the context that we want to keep it in, set it in. So this was like, Aarya was set in a privileged class, set in Rajasthan, set in a very, very patriarchal society.
Yeah.
So all of those contexts had to come, which meant that we look at relationships very differently, whether it's a father-daughter relationship or a mother-child relationship or a husband-wife relationship, or we also come from large families, and we take our relationships very seriously.
Yes.
So that has to have, which also means that the betrayal is very, very big, which means that, and we've seen it like right from Mahabharat, we've had multiple examples of this constant thing of family being the war front. वो जो आर्या की बहुत मशहूर का डायलॉग है, मशहूर डायलॉग कि भरोसा वही तोड़ते हैं जिस पर सबसे ज्यादा भरोसा होता है. So वही होता है कि how do you keep that universality of emotions such as betrayal, such as jealousy, such as love, such as hatred, such as fear, such as danger,
right,
and make it unique.
Yeah.
In the case of Grahan, the biggest challenge was that it's a novella of about 140 odd pages, which meant there were only a few scenes that you could take in the series. And series ke liye, there was not enough material, an entire track to make it relevant, which is how, and that became the core of the story in that sense. So Grahan has the anchor of the current times as the core of the story, and the story that's happening in the flashback, which is taken from the book, is sort of coming as vignettes. And it is like sort of just a backstory. So there is a proven potential of that material.
Yeah.
So the responsibility also of adapting it properly and adapting it better than what is already existing also falls on the screenwriter.
Please take us through the journey of writing Aarya with your collaborators.
It was lovely. I mean, Aarya is a blessing that I've had. There were people I'd worked with in Star, and one of my colleagues, ex-colleagues, in fact, who also has known me for many years. So I was in Delhi, I'd gone back to Delhi, and he randomly texted saying that somebody from Ram Madhwani's office would call you. And it's just so strange because a night before that, I was at a dinner with a very, very dear friend who's from this industry, with another publisher friend. These two are my mentors. These are women who have been my champions. So we were sitting with that. And she was the person who from the industry was talking about, randomly she was talking about how it was working with Ram and what a genius he is and what is his process like. And in my head, I have not even sort of expressed it. In my head, I'm thinking it'd be so much fun to work with somebody like this. And the next morning, from some random person, I am getting this message. I'm like, what is happening? I mean, this is uncanny. This is serendipity. This is, I don't know what it is.
Manifested it basically.
Clearly, because I did not even speak. It was only in my thoughts. I did not even say that in front of them. I just kept wondering because I was just so enchanted by the story. So it's like, what fun, no such crazy people to work with, such filmmakers. कब मिलेगा ऐसा वक्त ऐसे filmmakers के साथ काम करने का, राम के साथ काम करने में बड़ा मजा आएगा. That happened the next day, and I was like, okay, let's try. And then I met the team. The meeting went well, and I was very very unassuming. I was like, there's nothing to lose.
Yeah.
होगा तो होगा, नहीं होगा तो वापस अपने घर जाएंगे. ऐसा क्या है? And I was also working on my spec script. So I also wanted to sort of finish that because मैंने उसको 2-2.5 साल दे दिए थे और अपना काम भी पूरा कर लेते हैं. And there were a couple of book ideas that I was working on. So then I was called for a meeting with Ram. And from the word go, there was something. I mean, Ram started to present Aarya presentation that he had for the platform. And we started talking. We started talking about what Aarya really meant. Like, what is the name, the meaning of the word Aarya? It means a lady who's nobility, basically, a noble lady in Sanskrit. We started talking about that. We started talking about patriarchy. We started talking about being a modern woman, and despite being in a modern educated woman, the choices that we make, motherhood, and just went on and on. Like we rambled. We just talked about various things with my presumption that anyway there's nothing to lose. मजा आ रहा है मुझे इस आदमी से बात करके, and he really engages. He's a great orator, so he really just like pulls you into the conversation, and it's fun to talk to him.
Right.
So I really had a lovely time. 2 घंटे की बातचीत हो गई. So he's like, yeah, okay, we will come back to you with the writer's room schedule. And I'm looking at him. Okay, the paper, whatever. So I'm like, is this really happening? He's like, okay.
Am I in?
But would you not want to read something that I've written? He's like, no. And I'm looking at him but that's what I've heard, that, you some sample. Abhi मैंने आपको बोला कि भाई तुम्हारे पास sample, तुम्हारा काम ये वो.
So how long it took for you guys to finish the first draft?
But it immediately started, and the process started from March, and by December we were on the floor. So it takes about 8 months, but it was 8 months of intense writing and intense discussion.
How many rewrites? How many drafts?
Several. One forgets the count of it, really. But the other thing that I wanted to say of the process of Aarya was that I was the youngest writer. Youngest in the sense that youngest person. By youngest, I mean in terms of experience in screenwriting. We had Ram Madhwani, of course, who's a national award-winning filmmaker, a great ad filmmaker, and a whole lot of things. Then we had Sandeep Modi, who had just come out of his national award-winning film Chumbak. So his film was still getting awards, and he was still, sort of being hailed as this young director. So he's very, very sharp, and he came from a lot of experience. He'd been assistants on several great films, and he's very, very good at his work. And then I had Sandeep Srivastava as my co-writer, which was overwhelming. I looked at his profile and I was like, ab tak 56, New York, bhai sahab, main kahan thehrungi? Matlab, what am I doing in this writer's room? So I was very scared. I was very overwhelmed.
In a room filled with such great co-writers, A, how do you find Anu find your voice? And B, how your character Aarya, or how you found the voice for Aarya's character?
So first, in order to find your character's voice, you first need to know the character really well. And the character is something that, especially in a collaborative process where it's a series where there are various writers and various creators on board, the character is not purely coming out of your own head. The character is a contribution of various permutations and combinations and arguments that's happening in the writer's room.
Yeah.
So everybody is coming from his or her own life experience, and that's sort of informing the character and the traits that the character will have, the flaws that the characters will have, or the choices that the character will make. Which means that to one individual, that choice may look like the right thing to do, but for the other individual, it'll be something else. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
If you have seen Aarya, the particular scene of Aarya leaving when there is a consignment to be done, this is season 1 that I'm talking about, and her son is unwell.
Yeah.
It opens on that scene. I think episode 6 opens on that scene. While everybody else, and I don't think episode 6 was something that I was writing, and I was just reading, and maybe I was writing, I don't know. I don't remember that. But the difference was that while we discussed the beat, the fact that Aarya's son could be unwell was not discussed.
Okay.
But because I have been a mother, I know the dilemma of the working mother. And in the writer's room, we had many times discussed about this dilemma. But it was very simple. It was very easy for me to write that scene because I'd seen it.
Yeah.
It was very, very personal.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. What is it that you're bringing from your own life and then matchmaking it with the character's life?
Yeah.
And it's a constant give and take.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that you will only be doing that with the female characters. You're also doing it with the male characters.
Yes.
How is grief impacting any individual? It is gender neutral.
Yep.
Emotions are gender neutral. We are all human beings. So then you're just borrowing from those experiences, understanding of human psychology or curiosity about human psychology, and that is what you're reflecting. That brings probably your voice and then makes it unique to the character's voice. So some, some one-liner that you will say as something which will remain It will
Yeah.
just become, it's a life philosophy that you will have, but it will
Yeah.
become character's life philosophy.
Right.
This is one. The most important thing that I want to add here is, here, the most critical thing is, of course, two things to be able to do what you're saying, that retaining your voice and making the character's voice distinct. One thing is, of course, be a very close observer. Have good ears. आप ना मतलब टोन डेफ नहीं हो सकते. आपको लगातार सुनना होता है, सुनते रहना होता है, बातचीत करते रहनी होती है. तो दैट lends to good dialogue writing at some point. I'm not a very good dialogue writer. Sandeep Srivastava is a brilliant dialogue writer. And I remember very categorically, he had once in our discussions, he had said, I'd asked him that, how do you write so well? Like, आपके वो इतने कैसे वो ना सुर में होते हैं जो
Dialogues.
डायलॉग्स ना
Yeah.
सुर में होते हैं, वो सुर कहाँ से आता है? So he had said कि बस आप सुनते रहो ना. आप देखो ना, अगर ध्यान से सुनो तो वजन होता है, हर शब्द का एक वजन होता है
Yes.
ना, तो वो वजन हर तरह से आता है.
Yeah.
हर एक जो रीजन होता है, तो महाराष्ट्र के रीजन में मराठी स्पीकिंग लोगों के जुबान का वजन अलग होगा, राजस्थानी का वजन अलग होगा, बिहारियों का वजन अलग होगा, दिल्ली वालों का अलग होगा. मैं बहुत अर्बन बोलती हूँ तो मेरी जुबान का वजन बहुत अलग होगा. सो यू जस्ट हैव टू बी अवेयर ऑफ दैट, एंड दैट हैपेंस व्हेन यू आर लिसनिंग अ लॉट.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that you must do. The second thing that helps immensely is you must be a good reader. You have no idea when and how something that you must have read, some one line that may have got stuck here and you may have written down in your diary, transforms into something which reflects as your character voice.
Yeah.
And it's inexplicable. You cannot explain this process. Your subconscious is constantly filling in with a lot of these kind of information, these kind of thoughts, these kind of fundamentals of life, points of view that begins to become the voice of the character. So 3 things that I've said here which are critical. How are you experiencing life begins to reflect on your writing. How are you reading begins to reflect on your writing. And how are you observing and listening also begins to inform your writing.
Wow. Great. That's a great answer actually.
So there's one thing which I think you missed in that question is how do you make your own voice heard in a room full of writers where they have much more experience than you, but you have a point that you think makes sense for the scene. So how do you make that point across, like to get over the intimidation aspect of it?
So again, I'll speak from anecdotes and not so much theory. Particularly in case of Aarya, the one thing that I did was I was very keen. Like I said, I was very keen to prove myself. I requested that, can I do the first draft of the pilot? Let me do the first draft. I know I'm not supposed to write it. The head writer should be writing it, or the senior writer should be writing it, but let me attempt it. You can discard it. आप dump कर देना उसको, पर मुझे लिखने की एक कोशिश तो करने दो. And when that happened, when I wrote the draft, not to say that it was a draft which was eventually used, a lot of it changed, but that gave everybody a lot of confidence that, oh, there were certain things that I could see very differently. And I was perceiving from the writer's room and that was coming on paper. So from there on, the relationship really changed in the writer's room because I had something to prove, which is why. So what a spec script does for a young screenwriter is something that I tried to do with my pilot, the one attempt of the pilot that I did. And from there on, it became a very collaborative process because they knew I had a voice. And I'd proven that. I'd written 50 pages of a screenplay and I'd submitted to them. So there was enough evidence that I could do. I knew what I was talking about. So basically, to answer your question in one line, let your work talk.
Please take us to the importance of structure and how you used it for Grahan. It's absolutely bang on what you did on the 8th episode.
Yeah. Oh my God, it was so tough. Adesh, writing Grahan was so tough. मेरा काफी सारा past trauma निकल के आएगा अभी मतलब हम सब के. इनफैक्ट तुम किसी भी राइटर से पूछो क्योंकि बहुत मुश्किल था. It was a very difficult show to crack at the step outline level, beat sheet level, which is when you're doing the structure. So we had actually done multiple drafts or broad stories and multiple drafts had got rejected by the platform. Multiple drafts. मतलब वो पता नहीं कितने दिन लगे थे सिर्फ ब्रॉड स्टोरी पे अराइव होने में कि भाई ऐसी वाली कहानी हमको करनी है. उसमें क्या हुआ था कि एज अ कंसल्टेंट करण अंशुमन वाज बॉट इन, who's a master of structure. Like, or series में, मतलब he's the OG
Yeah.
series
Inside
guy.
Age, Mirzapur, why? Yes.
वो सबसे पहला, हाँ. So तो था ही, तो naturally he knew the format. अभी यहाँ पे लोग सीख रहे थे और उसने करके छोड़ दिया था. So that really helped because his insights on structure were just brilliant. Some of these ideas that he came up about making it non-linear, entering from a certain thing, keeping the cliffhangers, doing the first act in a way where it gave a sense of both the nostalgia, whereas while the nostalgia was also there, the sense of this being like कि अभी के time में भी बहुत ज़्यादा drama हो रहा है. That sense, all of that actually came from his guidance, and the writers' room like very एकदम blind faith के साथ just followed him. That's how at least we arrived at a structure, but it was the longest process. मतलब screenplay लिखना और dialogues लिखना actually fag end of the process of writing tha for Graham. Cracking the structure was the toughest thing because these two worlds had to interweave. And you had to have the relevance. Like the one thing that we keep saying again and again, and especially in the case of period, if you're doing some sort of a period thing, we have to have this constant reminder that the future or today, basically the now, is a consequence of our past.
Yes.
So that was the theme which became the theme of Amrita, like what happens to Amrita. That becomes the anchor of the story, right? And everything else begins to inform that final thing, that how's Amrita's identity. Not to say that it came easily. Like I said, I think very easily it took us 18 months or so to arrive at
18?
that eventually, yes.
Wow.
It was the longest process. There were several heartbreaks. It was very difficult for me. Also at one point, because I began to feel like I was not contributing enough, and I was not getting it. And obviously it becomes personal because, like I said, Satya is a friend, and I felt like, oh my God, what if his trust is betrayed? What if we don't manage to do this? And to be honest, I did step away from the process for about 6 months and then went back to it. So when we went back, and when actually the credit goes to another writer who came in. So again, it's such a also great example of the amalgamation of how writers and their energies come together. So like I said, there was a creator, then there was Satya's original work, then there was Karan who was guiding us, then Navjot came up for a while to help in the story. And Navjot came with his own like quirkiness and his own worldview. And because, he was from Bareilly, and he had anecdotes on 84. So that informed a lot of things. And it used to become very interesting discussions. And then he stepped away. And then Vibha Singh, who did the screenplays. And her energy was very different because then she looked at the material very differently. It was a fresh eyes. After 18 months of whatever had been done, she looked at the material and then started to write the screenplay. So her questions that would come up were great revelations for us, because then we were really just trying to realize that, there were lacunas in the story. And then we would try to fix that, and that screenplay and story, like we would fix the story, and then this would fix the screenplay. Then the screenplay would be done. Then dialogue के level पे, फिर dialogue के level पे होते होते फिर scenes के कभी mood बदल जाते थे. It was a long-standing process, and every person became a very critical part of the process. Every single person who contributed, even as a consultant or even for very brief time, hats off to the producer, hats off to the creator, who decided that everybody will be credited in a fair manner. So which is why you will see that Graham has about 8, 10, I don't know how many writers. But because everybody was contributing, and it was a tough story to crack.
For new writers, for our first-time writers, please tell what is a beat sheet, what is the role of a beat sheet in screenplay writing.
Beat sheet to me is a very, very critical thing to have. Like, beat sheet is the spine, I would say, like skeleton. और अगर ये analogy ली जाए कि भाई आपको एक मुकम्मल इंसान तैयार करना है, तो उस इंसान को तैयार करने के लिए फिर आपको क्या क्या चीज़ें चाहिए होंगी. आपको एक बेसिक हड्डियों का ढांचा चाहिए होगा, आपको उसके ऊपर फिर फ्लैश चाहिए होगा, फिर स्किन चाहिए होगा, फिर एक रूपरेखा, उसका एक रंग होगा, और उसके बाद फिर उसमें जान फूंकनी होगी, वो सोल होगा एक. इस मेटाफर के साथ हम चलें तो फिर बीट शीट इज द स्केलेटन ऑफ, इज द स्ट्रक्चर. बेसिकली it will tell you कि भाई what does beat mean really. ऐसे मतलब जैसे बातों या संगीत के उसमें क्या होता है beat. There you're landing. Beat is that you're landing. So wherever you're landing on what you want to say in the story. I'll give you a very basic example. 6 लोग एक कमरे में बैठे थे, 2 लोग बात कर रहे हैं, 3 लोग सुन रहे हैं, एक का कंप्यूटर खुला हुआ है और अचानक कंप्यूटर में आग लग जाती है. So all of this is a beat. कंप्यूटर में आग लगना is for example the sum. So that's the beat. That's where the story is something happening. Otherwise everything is information. बैठे हुए हैं, बात कर रहे हैं, ये हो रहा है, वो हो रहा है, एक्शन जो है. But where something on the story happens, that's the beat. अचानक से बाहर से किसी को बुलाया जाता है, फोन नहीं लग रहा है. फोन नहीं लग रहा है is another beat. Very basic example I'm giving. फोन लगता है, पता चलता है कि शहर में दंगे फैल गए हैं. That's another beat. आग बढ़ती जा रही है. That's another beat. किसी तरह से पानी का इंतजाम होता है और पानी डाला जाता है, लेकिन तब तक आग बढ़ चुकी है. That is another beat. So basically, as the story progresses and there is some form of landing at one particular thing, that's the beat. That's what beat sheet is. It's a compilation of the important things that will happen in the story. So अभी तो बन गया, skeleton तो हो गया. So एक और जो हम टर्म इस्तेमाल करते हैं, जो आपने भी शायद सुना होगा, वो होता है स्टेप आउटलाइंस. हम स्टेप आउटलाइनिंग करते हैं. स्टेप आउटलाइनिंग इज वन स्टेप अहेड. कि उसमें बीट में ना थोड़ा सा और हमने बढ़ा दिया, कि बता दिया कि भाई ये कैरेक्टर ऐसा महसूस हो रहा है, मोटा मोटी इनके बीच में ये बातचीत होगी और इस सीन में ये कॉन्फ्लिक्ट होगा. नॉट इन द स्क्रीन प्ले मैनर, बट in the sense that what is happening in
like
in,
3 lines of that beat, 3 lines of that beat,
3-4 lines of the synopsis of the scene. So that's the step outline. कुछ लोग ज़्यादा डिटेल लिखते हैं, कुछ कम डिटेल लिखते हैं, डिपेंडिंग ऑन दैट. सो वो हो गया कि भाई हमने अब मांस चढ़ा दिया और बनने लगा, पुख्ता इंसान बन गया. उसके बाद होते हैं कि फिर हमने कैरेक्टर्स को एक किस्म का टोन देना शुरू किया. वो कहाँ से आता है? वो डायलॉग से आता है. वो कि कौन किससे कैसे बात कर रहा है, कहाँ पे ह्यूमर है, कहाँ पे सैडनेस है, कैसे, क्योंकि डायलॉग्स आर अ क्रिटिकल कंपोनेंट ऑफ अ गुड स्क्रिप्ट. सो उससे जो होता है ना, वो धीरे धीरे करके उसमें फिर उसकी रूपरेखा बनने लगती है. और जो जान होती है ना, मुझे लगता है जो सोल ऑफ द स्क्रिप्ट इज बेसिकली द मोस्ट इंटेंजिबल थिंग. रूह तो दिखाई नहीं पड़ती ना, लेकिन वो न रहे तो फिर तो इंसान ही न रहे. तो वो रूह क्या होती है? That is basically the core of your film, which is sometimes called genre, which is sometimes called theme. It's more to do closer to the theme than your genre. So the theme, what you're trying to say, what is the crux of your story is the soul of the story. And interestingly, I feel the crux of the story actually comes in the end, after you've done this process. Unless you have, of course, we will write a log line, and from there, there's a core idea. You start with something. But that core idea after this journey will get evolved. Either it'll be close to what you have already thought, and then you're a great storyteller, then you're a great creator because, or it would have evolved. Whatever that is, ultimately, after what you have written, and if that what you have written is true to the core which started and, which is coming across here as a cohesive thing that you're trying to say, that's when you have the soul to your script.
When you have an idea, and because you have written books, you have written screenplays, you have translated work, you have done everything under the roof, how do you decide that this particular seed will make for a good film script, will make for a good web series, will make for a good novel? The idea for novel will not be as good for film.
Absolutely.
So how you decide it?
पहले तो सबसे पहला होता है कि वो टाइम टेस्ट करता है. पहले तो एक आइडिया जो आपके पास आया, एंड इफ इट स्टेड विथ यू एंड इट हैज नैग्ड यू नो एंड, तो वो आइडिया इज वर्थ परस्यूइंग. कंटिन्यूअसली मतलब अभी करना ही है, कभी करना ही है, अभी जो भी. उसके बाद क्या होता है ना कि उस सोचते रहो ना. इफ यू मेडिटेट ऑन दैट आइडिया, बाय मेडिटेशन आई डोंट मीन सिटिंग डाउन एंड, मतलब मेडिटेट इन द सेंस ऑफ थिंकिंग, रियली इंट्रोस्पेक्ट, मैरिनेट. वेल, ओके, I'm more meta than you. जब हम वही मैरिनेट करने देते हैं उस आइडिया को, तो फिर वो धीरे धीरे करके ना एक ऐसी जगह पे पहुंचता है जब आपको कैरेक्टर्स और दुनिया दिखाई देने लगती है. again, it's something which is very inexplicable and
Yes,
only
yes.
a creator will understand.
Yes, yes.
It's not only to do with the jargon of storytelling. The
Mhm.
idea will come to a startup person also. So वो पुख्ता कब होने लगता है ना जब आप उसके अराउंड चीजें बिल्ड करने लगते हो. तो जैसे वही होता है ना कि स्टार्टअप का एक आइडिया आया, बड़ा आपने सोचा बड़ा ब्रिलियंट आइडिया है, उसके बाद 5 आइडिया आए, आपने तो ओ यू आर अ ग्रेट आइडिएटर, आप तो 10 आइडियाज,
Yeah.
15 आइडियाज, 20 आइडियाज, यूनिक, आप ढूंढ लो नहीं मिलेगा, वैसा
Yeah.
टाइप का. बट ऑफ नो यूज, आइडियाज आर ऑफ नो यूज टिल यू हैव पुट सम मीट टू इट. By adding meat, I mean if it's a story idea, if it is lending itself to some characters,
Mhm.
some world,
Mhm.
and you've been able to sort of in your head also build something around it. कि एक लाइन का आइडिया आया
Right.
कि एक लड़की को एक लड़के से प्यार हो जाता है, पर उनकी फैमिली आड़े आती है. बहुत बेसिक आइडिया है, रोमियो जूलियट के 1000 अडेप्टेशंस बन चुके
Yeah.
हैं, बहुत ही बेसिक आइडिया है, लेकिन फिर भी ये यूनिक हो सकता है. कब यूनिक हो जाता है? जब आप उसको बैकड्रॉप और कैरेक्टर्स दे देते हैं, जब वो सैराट बन जाता है.
Right.
हाउ डू यू अराइव एट दैट?
Right.
You arrive at that, but constantly, digging on that idea कि उसके characters कैसे होंगे, वो दुनिया कैसी होगी, वो लोग कौन से होंगे, वो conflict कौन सा होगा. No idea is worth its salt unless written on paper, at least in the 5 to 10 pages. Now coming to your next question कि आपको कैसे पता चलता है कि ये शॉर्ट स्टोरी है या नॉवल है या फिल्म का आइडिया है
या वेब सीरीज का आइडिया है.
या वेब सीरीज का आइडिया है. वो जब आप 5 पेजेस 6 पेजेस लिख लेते ना, दिमाग में रहने वाला कोई आइडिया किसी काम का नहीं होता. जब आप लिख लेते हैं ना, चाहे वो 5 पेजेस में ही हो या 10 पेजेस में ही हो,
हाँ.
तब आपको समझ में आने लगता है कि ये तो नहीं बन सकता, मतलब ये तो सीरीज बनी नहीं सकती है, इसमें तो उतना मीट ही नहीं है, या ये फिल्म के लिए सही है, या फिर ये शॉर्ट स्टोरी में खत्म हो जाएगी, ये तो शॉर्ट फिल्म लायक ही है. इट कम्स फ्रॉम practice, but it is also very instinctive. You are your best judge. So then there are the certain things only a novel can allow you to do. And then there are certain things only a series or a film or a short film can allow you to do. So you just have to be judicious. And that, I guess, comes from practice.
What motivates you to write even today?
That's such a difficult question. Deadline. Deadline is the biggest motivation. जब जर्नलिज्म कर रहे थे तो भैया बुलेटिन जाना है 2 घंटे में, अभी तो
Right.
लिखना ही पड़ेगा. आप रो धो के सही आप अपनी स्क्रिप्ट तो लिखेंगे ही.
Right.
That aside, seeing something come together is another
Hmm.
motivation. I mean, again, it's something very, very inexplicable. So, just this fact of कि पूरा हो रहा है, कुछ बन रहा है, कुछ
Yeah.
दिखाई दे रहा है.
Otherwise, it's
कुछ
just
मतलब-
ideas marinating in your head.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's just
Then there's no
coming.
space left in the fridge.
Yes, why do that? Do na yaar. So that's also another motivation. And the third motivation, of course, is this is a skill that you have, and this is something that you love to do. Not everybody has that option. I have that opportunity of doing what I love, which is also my livelihood, which will also give me money, which will
Right.
also run my house. So that's another big motivation.
Right.
That sense of gratitude that I'm doing what I love to do. I've waited for so many years to do this also is a great motivation. But I don't think I would have any other way of living. So even if I don't have a deadline
Mhm.
and I don't have a film to write right now, for example, I will go back and work on my novel because I do not know of any other way of living.
So you are saying that you are one of those disciplined writer who will write daily, or you are someone like sprint idea आया खत्म किया.
Absolutely not. No. You show up for your story and the story shows up for you.
Beautiful.
As simple as that.
So for those writers, like most of us, who are not disciplined writers, what would you tell them how to get into discipline of writing daily? Because I have heard it many a times that most of the screenwriters that I have come across and I have talked to, they have said that write daily, write daily, write daily.
It's honing your craft, so you have
But
to write
how?
daily.
Like what is one thing a listener or I should do to get into the habit of being a disciplined writer?
Put a sticky note on your laptop screen and assign a goal to yourself, which is very small. 500 words, one scene, one character sketch, something which is achievable. Do that, feel the gratification, let it sink, increase the goal the next day. 550 words, 1.5 scenes, 2 character notes, and so on and so forth. Start with 20 minutes, go to 40 minutes, and then 1 hour. If you can't sustain it daily, do it for a week and then push forward. Otherwise, there's no other way. कोई और तरीका नहीं हो सकता. हम सिर्फ ये सोचते रहें कि हम राइटर हैं और हम लिखे नहीं, तो हम राइटर तो कभी नहीं बन पाएंगे.
हम तो थिंकर बन गए फिर.
हाँ. और थिंकर तो यार बड़े हैं, बहुत सारे हैं इस दुनिया में. उन थिंकर से भी आपको बहुत पाला पड़ेगा जब आप राइटर, सच में राइटर बन जाएंगे. और जब आपको बहुत सारा काम भी मिलने लगेगा और बहुत सारा आप लिखने भी लगेंगे हर रोज. तो there is no other joy of finishing. If you know that joy, you won't stop. Which is why I'm saying just start with a very very छोटा goal. जैसे अपने केस में मैं बता रही हूँ कि मैंने ना 1000 वर्ड से शुरू किया था. मेरी पहली कहानी जो थी, जो मैंने छपने को भी नहीं दी थी, मतलब वो तो अपने लिए लिखी थी. और लेकिन जब फिक्शन की पहली कहानी लिखी थी तो 800 या 900 वर्ड्स की थी. फिर वो 800-900 वर्ड से फिर आप 75,000 वर्ड्स का एक नॉवल तक का सफ़र तय कर रहे हैं. या आपने 5 सीन्स का एक शॉर्ट फिल्म लिखा है और वहाँ से फिर आप 40 सीन का एक एपिसोड लिखने लायक बन गए हैं. सो वो जर्नी अगर आप लगातार उस पाथ पर बने रहेंगे तभी तय कर पाएंगे. वरना तो आप उतरते रहे फिर सड़क से, तो फिर तो रास्ता भी छूटेगा और मंजिल भी छूटेगी.
How to copyright one's original work? Where to go?
First, it is important to understand what original work, what you mean by original work. If you mean that it's a work that you have fully created yourself without any help or association or collaboration with anybody else, then it's your work. Then there are various ways of doing it. There is Copyright Society where you can register it. It's very nominal. They take 100-120 rupees, but you can copyright your work there. The second way, of course, that we all know is Screenwriters Association, where you register your work. And the other thing that you do is you register at every stage.
Okay.
Like you first register like a 10-pager, then you register a more detailed one, maybe a beat sheet or a step outline. And then there are various, SWA offers you that.
Synopsis and story, screenplay. They have even like space
Script,
for dialogues.
Yeah, script.
Yeah.
So as and when your work begins to evolve, just keep registering it. It doesn't take too much.
Okay.
But at least it keeps your work safe. So and if you keep registering it at every stage, it makes you the original work owner of the work automatically, because then you at every stage you have sort of registered it. Now, because screenwriting in its nature is very very collaborative,
Yes.
there are times when we collaborate with people. In that case, it becomes very important to be very very clear in your communication with your fellow writer as to what are the expectations that you guys are coming with. The problem happens is that we do a lot of things in friendship. Shuru mein. It's a classic startup trouble also. Matlab, you read about startup stories starting from Facebook to whatever, Apple. मतलब दुनिया के सबसे बड़े कॉर्पोरेशन से लेकर और एकदम हर लेवल पे वो दोस्ती यारी में शुरू होती हैं चीज़ें और बाद में बहुत पचड़ा होता है. सो वो बहुत बहुत आसानी होगी कि किसी ना किसी फॉर्म में, पेपर वर्क में, email per bhi, you don't need to go to a lawyer to get a contract signed. But just on email, this understanding, between you and me, this is the understanding कि तुम इतना लिखोगे, मैं इतना लिखूंगी, तुम्हारा काम ये होगा, मेरा काम ये होगा. बहुत जैमिंग होती है, मतलब it's very collaborative.
Right.
So उस केस में कि और कैसे पता कि कौन सी लाइन, कौन सा डायलॉग तुम्हारा दिया हुआ था, तो जैमिंग में पूरा का पूरा सीन बनता है.
Right.
So have this very clear understanding कि हम को शेयर करेंगे, को ओन करेंगे.
Okay.
क्योंकि मैं ये करने वाला हूं और तुम ये करने वाली हो. सो वो क्लैरिटी होगी ना ईमेल पर भी, तो दैट इट विल हेल्प एंड इट विल नॉट पुट यू इन ट्रबल. द बिगेस्ट ट्रबल इज दैट वी डू नॉट कम्युनिकेट. सो प्लीज कीप योर कम्युनिकेशन ओपन.
What would you tell a young Anu who's starting out to be a writer with your learnings that you have got in last 20 years as the Anu that we are talking to?
डोंट गिव अप. हो जाता है.
Right. Don't give up is what you have learned, and that's what you are telling.
या मतलब लगता है उस समय कि नहीं हो रहा यार, नहीं होगा
True.
कभी. कितना मतलब ओके, I mean, there have been days when depression is real for writers. Mental health issues are real for a lot of us. It's very scary. It's a deep, dark place, and a lot of people can't understand why you're going through this. My spouse used to say that likhna hi to hai. When why do you have to like really just be this person? Nahi hoga. Only, an artist can understand the pain of what you're trying to do, which is trying to like really as difficult as giving birth to something. So your heart will break. You will see therapists a lot. You will probably also do all sorts of things that you should not be doing to your health. Please be kind to yourself. क्योंकि वक्त लगता है लेकिन हो जाता है. So don't give up.
Thank you, Anu ma'am, for coming to our show. Can't thank you enough, but still, like, I really want to thank you for a zillion times. Like, you have taken your time and you have so candidly and open-mindedly spoke to us, told us anecdotes, stories about your process and what makes you you. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being on our podcast.
The last thing that I want to say is we need more and more of these conversations with each other, with writers, with creators, with directors, with other artists, just so we know that there's a community, just so we know that we understand each other, and just so we know that we are here for each other. So hopefully this podcast will also lead to this very strong culture that eventually made startup world what it did, which is the culture of mentor and mentees. So I hope more mentors come out of here, senior writers, experienced writers support young writers more, opportunities are shared more. And trust me, the one thing that will happen in the process of you wanting to break into the screenwriting business, आपकी स्क्रिप्ट बने ना बने, आप बहुत कमाल के इंसान ज़रूर बन जाएंगे. तो जो चीज़ आपको सबसे ज़्यादा तकलीफ पहुंचाती है, सबसे ज़्यादा तोड़ती फोड़ती है, वही आपको मुकम्मल बनाती है और सबसे ज़्यादा मजबूत बनाती है. सो यू आर not just learning the craft of screenwriting, but you're learning the skill of being resilient. You're learning the skill of being a great negotiator. You're learning the skill of being a very, very disciplined person. And you're learning the importance of self-care. So और कुछ हो ना हो, ये 4 चीज़ें तो आपके साथ ज़रूर होंगी. So all the very best to everybody who's listening to this podcast. Thank you very much for having me here, guys.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our episode. We hope you enjoyed it and found some answers and insight. If you liked it, please subscribe the show and share it with your friends. You can also follow us on Instagram for regular updates. Details mentioned in the description. Thank you for your time.